So how does coaching or any intervention, where's its place when we have a dysfunctional system? My thought is, okay, we live in a world with like, this is, November of 2023. So anybody listening to this knows that like there's a shit show going on with, cataclysmic things socially, politically, environmentally, in the medical system, in, almost every caretaking field there is. I mean, it's abysmal, right? And my thought is the system is broken in so many different systems, right? No matter where you look, you're gonna find a bunch of broken systems. In the world of physicians and world of caretakers for clinical clinicians, it's broken and there's dysfunction and it does need to change. But if it needs to change, I want I want everybody to be at their best and not be in their own way so that they can think as creatively as possible and help make the change.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. We have the amazing Dr. Kristi Angevine. She's an OBGYN, a coach, a speaker, and a podcast host of Habits on Purpose, where she's helping people to develop habits and live the life that they love. I'm so happy that she's with me today. So thank you so much for being here, Kristi.
Yeah, I just thank you for having me. I love that this is kind of an excuse just to be able to hang out with you. I know we're
Yes.
making it official and we're recording it and all, but it feels like ever since the last time we talked, I've just been waiting to talk again. So thanks for
I
having me.
love it. And we're inviting our friends today.
Exactly. So good.
Yeah. So if people have not yet met you, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Kristi Angevine. I live in Central Oregon. We live in Bend. It's sort of the sort of high desert part of Oregon, not rainy. I'm married to a retired ICU nurse who is our stay-at-home. I call him our stay-at-home CEO, and now I'm changing that to our stay-at-home chief of everything officer, like
Nice.
does all the things. And I'm a full-time life coach. I have 2 kiddos. I love to mountain bike. Don't mountain bike as much as I'd like to do, as much as I'd like. Yeah, that's the short version.
I didn't know that Oregon had a place where it didn't rain.
Yeah, so most people don't. I didn't either. Like when we came out here for our first trip, it was my big vacation between residency and my first, doctor job. And I'd heard about this town because when I was waiting tables, one of my like waiter people showed me some pictures of this area. And it was of this place called Smith Rock. If you Google it, you'll see it's just this huge, big, like dry rock formation. A bunch of climbers come out to it. And I was like, that's Oregon? That looks like Arizona or New Mexico or Colorado
Wow.
or something. Um, and so we decided, what the heck, this place looks gorgeous. We'll come visit it. And what we discovered, and then ultimately we loved it so much we moved here, what we discovered is the state of Oregon, so big square, and it's kind of like the entire United States in one state. So,
Wow.
you don't have sandy, warm beaches, but you have the coast, kind of more of a rugged coast. And then if you go inland just a little bit from that, you have kind of more deciduous trees and like humidity and green, and then lots of rainforest stuff and rain and Portland, that type of thing. And then
Hmm.
if you go inland from that, maybe an hour, you have the Cascade Range. So lots of snowy, rugged, like really rugged, snowy mountains, lots of skiing. And then
Oh,
if you go
yeah.
inland from that a little bit more, it's more like big evergreen trees. And then you get into desert. So there's a lot in a little space.
That is incredible. So I live in Houston and I'm always missing nature.
Uh,
So we're just going to
yeah.
stop the recording so I can come visit you. No,
Yeah.
I'm
So
just
you're going
kidding.
to get on a plane and I'm
I'm
going to
going to
pick you up
just
and
come.
we're going to pick up a recording here. We'll just sit in my office and we'll chat like we're,
That would
yeah.
be
So for sure you have to come visit.
Yeah, that is incredible. Nice. Well, very cool. And I love your podcast, Habits on Purpose. And I can't go without, there's so many
Thank
great
you.
topics on there. But for people that maybe haven't tuned in, can you give an overview? And then, of course, we can probably jump into some of those topics that are on your podcast.
Totally. Yeah. So Habits on Purpose, the name came from, I got fascinated with habits when in the beginning of my coaching career, I was coaching a lot of physicians on their bad habits. So habits that they wanted to change, like they're being on their phone too much, overeating, over drinking, shopping for things they didn't need as ways to cope with the stress in their lives.
Mhm.
And what I realized in coaching on these very specific things is that underneath all of them was a habituated thought pattern. And it wasn't really ever about the food or the drinking or the shopping. It was not about the stuff. It was about what was behind the stuff. So I got really interested in habits. And I thought, well, these are kind of like default habits that people come to me with that they don't like and they want intentional habits. So thus habits on purpose was formed. And the whole premise of the podcast is that our habits are more than just like our morning routine or like, how you put your hair behind your ear, like without thinking about it.
Mhm.
They're more than just those behaviors. They're actually the autopilot ways that we think and emotionally respond, as well as our behaviors. And so if you think about habits in that way, sort of a bigger umbrella, then our habits are kind of based in a lot of the beliefs that we have that might be subconscious, something like the rules that we have for how we should behave, or beliefs we have about the world, or beliefs about our capacity that are like the seeds from which our thoughts grow and from which our default autopilot, like ways we are in the world, grow. So I like to think that our habits are learned and that they're solutions that are really adaptive and protective in some way. So we were really crafty. We encountered crazy stuff in life and we were resourceful and responded in the best way we knew at the time. And
Mhm.
then we operationalized some of those things and they became our autopilot responses. And sometimes we think of them as our personality, like, oh, I'm just a
Mhm.
type A perfectionistic person. I'm a high achiever
Yeah, I
because it worked really well.
totally. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
because they're learned, they can be
yeah.
unlearned in ways that people that are much more malleable than we really think. And
Mhm.
that's what I try to teach in the podcast is just how we have more agency than we realized because nobody really taught us that. At least I didn't grow up learning that. So
Yeah, and how much of our adult life is unlearning a lot of the habits that we develop. And as you said, there was a time and a place for them. And I remember being a perfectionist became an identity for me. Being a perfectionist, rigid, black and white, like I thought that was a good thing because I was like, it's perfect or it's not. And I was disciplined to like an extreme degree where it was causing so much destruction in my life, but because our society champions like restriction and discipline and all these things that became, I was just consumed by it. And I didn't think that there was a way out.
I mean, and it makes sense that you didn't think there was a way out, right? Because those things, like you said, they're championed by society. They served you well. Like I'm just saying you, but like they serve all of us well and to a certain degree. Like they help us advance in our careers. They help us like clinically not to miss anything. They help us to study really hard. There's some good things about them. Like if you just had the good without the underbelly, awesome. Except they come with a cost, which is the problem that sometimes we don't see until years later and we go, wait a second, oh my gosh, right?
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of the underpinnings for that retrospective review, if we look back and then we start judging ourselves because we have that habit,
Oh my
how many
gosh.
people can look back with self-compassion and just say it served a purpose at the time and here is what is no longer serving me, and here are times where maybe I do want to be a little bit more perfectionistic.
Yeah, no, I think what you just said, I mean, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of things in what that simple statement you just said, because I would say, I think you see this too. Most people don't retrospectively look back at their habits and say, oh, first pass, gosh, they made so much sense. Like so much compassion for the me that was, perfectionistic, all or none, catastrophized, second guess, like shamed herself. Oh, so
Mhm.
great that I did that. I get it. But now I want a different thing. Mostly it's like, oh my gosh, what is my problem? I can't believe I did that. I should have known better. Like, how could I not see it? What was I stupid or something? We layer like the misery on
Mhm.
top of the misery. So I think it's a skill to cultivate and learn that compassion. Like, and I love how Kristen Neff says that, like, to be your inner ally instead of your inner enemy. I think it's something, especially when we are sort of that ilk of being really hard on ourselves as a way to motivate ourselves or to make sure that people are safe or to do well. That's like one of those like learning to do a one-handed push-up. It takes work. It's not
Mhm.
natural, right?
And people are afraid that developing self-compassion is going to make them soft or weak.
Yeah, which is just like which also makes sense when you come from the culture that we're in, which is that sort of like we were talking before we started recording, that very rugged, individualistic, like I'm gonna pull myself up by my own bootstraps and like I'll sleep when I'm dead, and emotions are unpredictable and labile and soft. And when we hear all of that, it's like, oh, compassion is kind of, it's wimpy, it's making excuses, it's self-pitying. And like when there's shit to do, like we can't sit around and feel sorry for ourselves. Like there's that idea when it's like, oh no,
Mhm.
self-compassion, that's actually not self-compassion. That's some warped idea of self-compassion. Self-compassion is actually like extremely empowering. If you can be self-compassionate, you're going to be so much more effective in those situations where you think self-compassion is going to muddy the waters.
And how about the specialty that you went into? It wasn't the most
Mm.
self-compassionate specialty when it comes to the training and what it was known for. How was that experience for
Yeah. Like I remember in medical school, like I struggled. I didn't know what specialty to go into. Like many people already know, but there were a lot of people who I knew that didn't know, and I was one of those. And I thought, well, I just assumed I would do. I had this idea. I was like, I'm going to do cardiology, or I'm going to do emergency medicine. I didn't know anything about either of them, but I just had this idea. I was like, that'd be kind of.
you?
And then when I got there, I realized, okay, I don't want to do cardiology, but I do want to do emergency medicine. And then I did my surgery rotation. I was like, oh shit, this is really cool. I really like surgery. And I remember my, ICU nurse husband was like, please don't do surgery. He's like,
Mhm.
he works with surgeons all the time. He's like, he sees their lifestyle. He's like, please, that's going to be awful. So then I did OBGYN, and I was like, I did it last because I knew I was going to hate it. I did not want to be around a bunch of catty women delivering babies. So I just had no interest. And I loved it. I loved my onc rotation. I loved it. And my husband was like, whew, glad you're not going to be a surgeon. So
Hmm.
how funny, right? Like all that, right? We just had no idea. But all that to say, when I was doing my OBGYN rotation, I saw one of my attendings, and this is med school, come around the corner and just shake his head and look at some of the people he works with and be like, I don't know why I do this. Like, this is so hard. And he looked up and he saw me and he's like, oh, I, I'm so sorry. Like, and just backpedaled. And he was like, that was a great delivery. Like, put a smile on, like, was completely inauthentic. But I remember seeing that and thinking, huh, I don't, I don't understand what's he talking about. Like, didn't have the capacity to think about that. So I don't know that I, going into it, really had much appreciation for the fact that there was another way to do it. I just thought this is just what you do. Like I don't looking back, there was not much self-compassion at all. But at the time I was so in it, it was just survival mode. Like this is just
Mhm.
what you do. You definitely didn't question things too much. Just kind of kept plugging along. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense because so when I was in surgery and I thought I knew I was really sensitive and I was in the military and I needed this persona that I was this badass military surgeon so that I would be untouchable and unstoppable and you just don't mess with me because I was tired of people messing with me. Like, you get walked all over, that people pleasing, and I was so done with it. So I'm like, in order to be worthy of life and protect myself, I have to be this badass military surgeon. And you kind of walk a little bit taller and you embrace what that means. But it's funny because now I look back and actually the people that I find to be badasses, they could be surgeon, they could be anybody but they're people that are living their authentic truth unapologetically. And I'm like, I didn't realize at the time that that's just what I was seeking, someone that just doesn't give a shit, right? That's just like, but in
Yeah.
order to embrace this persona that I was trying to create for myself, I thought I had to be super hard on myself and beat myself
Hmm.
down because I was told you have to develop thicker skin. And
Yeah.
then in August of my intern year, I was with an attending who had that surgeon type of like break them down and hope that they flourish. And I
Mm.
had no self worth. So I just took that and like ignored any positive feedback, listened to this person, even though she was, it wasn't just me. It was obviously not personal because that was her style of communication for everybody. But in coaching, we learned that people can't make us feel a certain way, right? And I know that now, but what she brought up in me was all of my insecurities, all of my lack of self worth. And I'm grateful to have been able to reflect and realize what was missing, but it went to catastrophic lows. And for the person that's not being honest with the trainees, or, that's the status quo of the culture. It's like people save face. And at the time I was not well, and I looked around and no one talked about anything. This is 2014 to 17. And
Yeah.
I'm like, it's me. And then I went to this taking care of our own mental health support for residents and faculty. And it was a one-on-one appointment. And they just offered me meds so I could just numb it out and make it through. I'm like, but I'm not sleeping or eating, and I'm not quite sure I want to be a surgeon, you know?
Oh my
And
gosh.
but
Wow.
but gosh, you can't quit now. You can't be a quitter, right? Oh man, all those things that come. And of course you can. I find that when we're trapped and we think we have to do these things, that is a high risk for suicide, because you feel like if you
Yeah.
don't do that, then you're going to be less worthy, and you feel like there's no other way. But you talked about survival mode, and how hard
Yeah.
is it to
Mhm.
think about options when you're in survival mode?
Well, I think you just nailed it. Like when you don't feel like you have any options and you only see, okay, I'm just going to chug along and get through this. Even when you're miserable, if you don't see anything else, like questioning that, especially if that requires you to like make a grand departure from something that you worked so hard from or so hard to get to, or if you're going to be the odd person out, like who in my mind, like it didn't cross my mind like, oh, I'm going to leave this training because I had there were a lot of good things that were very gentle about the residency program that I had that were quite compassionate. When I look back, I'm like, ooh, there were some things that were really, really great. But the times where I would question things the most, there was for sure a voice in my head that was like, imagining what other people would think, like, oh, she can't cut it, she can't handle it, she's clearly not smart enough. All the like, you're outside the club stuff. So that anytime I would even question things, I would just shut down that,
Yeah.
inquiry because, not only did this require a lot of time, commitment, dedication, resources, not only were there things about it that I really did love, but what would they think? And what would that mean about me? And a lot of it was because I was a bit of a shell in terms of like a tiny, like stick figure of self worth with this shell. Like it was like anything people would give me, I would be like, oh, that's how I built my
Mm.
self worth. And so all of the holes in my sense of personal self worth, you could see that in like how unwilling I was to really question, like, is this the right place for me? Is this what I really want to be doing? How, what are my options?
Yeah, it's really hard to know if because in training, we have to kind of be people pleasers because our grades and our feedback are dependent on other people's observations of our competence.
Mhm.
And I find that when I was questioning leaving and then what do I do next? And even now I'm finishing another fellowship 10 years after I've been in training for a real long time. But
Oh my goodness.
but I kept trying to make my first degree work. And I'm like, I knew in dental school I didn't feel like it was the right path, but I kept trying to make it work. And even now, as I'm transitioning again, any job I have, people are like, well, you should definitely do at least 20% in the dental clinic because you have this license. You don't want it to go to waste. I'm like, I would be so happy to let that license go and walk away so people don't keep shoving me in that corner. But there's a fear, right? And it's this fear of, well, then you can't fall back on it. And I only in the past week realized I would be so grateful if I couldn't fall back on it because I have established over and over that it's holding me back from other things that I really love because I'm just trying to keep it up and it's draining me.
Yeah, I think that's such a huge realization. Like, because sometimes the thing that we could fall back on is the thing that, like, the thing we don't want to have that as an option. Like, and not for everybody. Some people, when they make a career change, they're like, well, I'm going to do this, but if it doesn't, I can always come back to this thing because, like, there's enough about it that I liked, filled me up. Great. But it sounds like for you, there's not like if you needed to like go get some food for yourself and for your dog, right? You have a dog, is that right? Like if you need to feed
Oh,
you and your
yes.
dog,
My king.
my
Do I have a
yeah, if you
dog or
wanted to
is he?
right,
I have a
right.
a king in the shape of a dog that lives in my
King in the shape of
apartment.
the dog that you happen to cohabitate with, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
the two of you were like at risk of not having shelter or food, my guess is if it came down between using your dental degree or doing something else, where you're like, fine, I'm going to go, like work at the grocery store, I'm going to do telehealth or do something. My guess is you'd be like, oh, I do a lot of other things before that. And
Yeah.
sometimes when it's not an option, right?
I applied and interviewed at Aldi when I left my faculty position. I was a hospital-based faculty member during COVID. And I
Yeah.
left and I was like, I need to do something completely different. And now I've learned how common it's like a kind of a dream for us to do something that it's not so mentally and physically taxing for a little while, even though working at Aldi would have been physically taxing. I've watched a lot of the
Oh, yes. Yeah.
reviews.
Not easy. Yeah.
It's not an easy job, but it was just something to at least know that we would be fine if
Mhm.
and you know what's funny is that none of my family members are in healthcare right now. And oh, um, both of my sister and my brother, their families make more than I do with my 2 degrees in both dentistry and medicine. And I'm like, okay, I know realistically that people make more than me outside of medicine and dentistry. Like my brother does very well. And he has shown me that you don't have to be in either of those two, but you can be if you want to be successful. And whatever successful looks like to you, I have a very minimalistic lifestyle. So when I was talking to my brother, I'm like, man, I don't know if I should be jealous of you or not. I just don't know. I love my brother so much. And he goes, I like your life. It's simple. And I'm like, wow, that's in alignment. I like the simple life and it doesn't require a whole bunch of salary and a whole bunch of hours.
Yeah, I think I mean, hearing about this makes me smile so big because I find there's a simplicity, or it's not a simplicity, a flexibility in the simplicity that
Yeah.
sometimes is missing when there, is higher salary, higher expenses, bigger house, like things that are, I don't know, I don't want to say like a money prison, but like things that do require working at a level that brings in a certain amount. And if that weren't there, versus like if there is a simplicity, I feel like that does sort of like give a flexibility, which I find quite appealing and beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah. And even when we were talking about the habits that people form with perfectionism or money habits are so important to talk about and to
Mhm.
identify like, well, why do I feel like I want that big house? Or I bought a house when I finished my second residency. I'm laughing at myself. Just quit already because I'm thinking about going to another residency in the near future.
I
But
love it.
because like you said, what can it be? You just want to go back to work. I mean, to school, right? Because we can't figure out what job to, so I'm just going to keep training. But I did what America says you're supposed to do is the moment you can buy a house, buy a house. And at the time I thought that was the most economical decision. And then I realized that your primary home, it's not typically an investment. And I was like, oh my God, we were brainwashed and then thinking it was for so long. And then when I left my job, I sold my house and everything in it, and I was immediately calm.
Yeah.
It's like,
And
huh,
yeah, it's super interesting. Like it makes me wonder, like, okay, so like because like we talked about before, we know that owning a house, selling a house, like doesn't make us feel calm either way. It makes me wonder what was different, like what was going on in your mind when you had the house and the mortgage versus what
mhm.
was absent when you didn't that helped
Yeah.
you feel calm. Like,
That's a great coaching question because what it was is I felt trapped in the job that I wasn't wanting when I owned the house. So the moment that I sold it, I have flexibility to move. So I
mm,
like actually loved the condo. I love the neighborhood, but I didn't see myself staying there because I didn't find a job that I loved.
mhm.
And that I don't like to feel trapped. And so you're
uh,
right. It was the trapped feeling.
yeah, and I would say that none of us like to feel trapped, right? Like anything that, and I would be so nice to have like the crystal ball to be like, okay, if I go these three ways, I'm going to feel trapped. But if I go these three ways, less likelihood of feeling trapped, just based on what will resonate, what will align with me. Right. Like, I mean, for me, like, I think if somebody would have sat me down in high school and said, okay, so we're going to take a test about your core values, I would have just thought it was dumb. I wouldn't have really understood it. Like, it wouldn't have really landed. But it's something I wish, like, maybe in my, or I don't know, late 20s, if I could have really understood the importance of knowing, like, what really matters to me, and how will that be in alignment with, like, this path or this path or this path or this path. And I had somebody sort of to guide me to be like, all right, any of these will be fine. Like, you'll be fine at the end of any of these, like, whichever you pick. Keep waiting tables. You go be a psychologist. You go be, I didn't know what a life coach was. Go be a life coach. Go be a surgeon. Go be an OB/GYN. You're going to be fine at the end of all of these. But based on these core values, and like help me look at them to be like, okay,
Yeah.
where are there better fits and where are there less better fits?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have been phenomenal, because I didn't know how to look at it in those ways. I just knew these are things I want. And it seems like people who have those careers probably would have those things. So why don't I go do that?
Yeah. What's getting in the way of your mountain biking more?
Yeah. So right now it's getting in the way of my mountain biking. Let me see, like, that's a good question. Let me reflect on this. I have a feeling your listeners understand that this is not just a simple question, because it's not just time at this moment, it's a little bit time. Let me answer this just sort of like without editing. The first answer is a little bit of time, because both of our kiddos, with our blessing and our like invitation to like, would you like to do this, have decided to do this little like travel soccer league. So, and the what do you call it? I was going to say lessons. The practices are for each of them, like every single night of the week except Friday. So there's these evening time things. And, I work with, I live and I'm married to like the quintessential helper husband who like will Uber drive everybody everywhere. But like we generally share sort of like moving kiddos around to different things. So we have a bunch of afternoon activities that happen, that I love, that happen, that are harder for, like, when I go to the soccer field, even if I drop my kid off and come back, there's not like great biking there. It's just not useful there. So there's a little bit of a time constraint there. Then let's see, what's the other reason? I, in my business right now, what I've noticed is I'm still figuring out that balance between being available to have like the time and space that I like for like content creation. Like sometimes I can do things pretty quickly. And sometimes like I like to sit and I like to research and read and think and reflect in ways that feel pretty spacious. And then being available for clients, like if I, want paying clients, if I'm only available 2 hours a week, unless I find those two people, right? And for those two
Mm-hmm.
hours, like, so trying to make sure I'm available, but not too available. And then also making sure that there's white space. That is something that like I'm figuring out. And the crazy thing is, Jillian, as I'm thinking about this, the thing that is so ironic for me about thinking about the answer of being like, oh, there's not time spaces that I'm willing to devote to biking at this point yet, is
Mm-hmm.
that when I was working, my 60, 80 hours a week in busy private practice, I was riding my bike a ton. Because what I would do is if I had to be at the office or start my call shift at 7, in the summer, it gets light around 5:30 here. So by 5 o'clock, I would get up and I would just have my light and I would go out and I'd do a quick ride. I would ride really hard. And then I'd come home and I'd shower and I'd go, or I'd go to the gym I was doing a lot of exercising in the margins, even though I was living on fumes. Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
not, but I was unwilling to have the time that I had outside of work not be filled with things that I found joyful. So now I'm not working that much. I'm sleeping significantly more.
Thank
My
goodness.
days in general, yeah, like instead of barely sleeping or like doing all these overnight calls, like I sleep great. I get, and I have more time, but the time that I have, I'm doing other things with it. Like I'm walking my kids to school, or I'm taking them to soccer, or I'm doing that stuff and doing more co-parenting. Like my husband's like the primary one, but like doing more of that together stuff. And what the time that remains at this point, it's just less time. Like I know, like in terms of like riding like my bike 15 hours a week, I could pack it in on the weekends, but I'm not in shape to go ride my bike 8 hours. Like I just haven't, like I'm not there
Yeah.
yet. So it's a it's a Rubik's cube or Tetris that I'm still figuring out if this makes any sense. Like,
It
and it
makes a lot of
hasn't been
sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because what I hear
So
is that your values, right? So you like your bike. It's a value to ride your bike when you can, but
yeah.
there's values that take precedence, which is spending time with your family, going to their
Mhm.
activities, spending time with your husband, having white space, which I completely get where it's not scheduled time. So
Yeah.
it makes sense. Yes. And I find that when people judge themselves for not exercising or not doing a certain habit, it's like, oh, well, how are you spending your time? Well, maybe you just value those more at this moment, right? And maybe
Yeah.
who told you that you should value this? Because our society tells us to value these certain things, but if you don't, or they're less valuable than the things you just mentioned, I find
Mhm.
that when people are trying to tell me their values, they say maybe what society tells them. But then I'm like, well, how do you spend
Totally.
how would you like to spend your day? And they're completely different values, but I can't do that because of societal values. I'm like, okay, so we've identified that you have some values conflicts. And why are you letting society run your life? I mean, so many of us do, right? And
Totally. And don't necessarily realize there's that discrepancy between them or realize the indoctrination because like when we're in it, when we're in the jar, we can't see the label, right? As you were talking, it just made me realize I was like, oh, like one of the things is that I'm not I'm not interested in recreating so much of the sort of desperate hustle that I had in my past life
mhm,
because I absolutely could get up early, go in my garage, ride the bike, like, it was cold outside and dark. I could just get on the trainer. I could ride there. I could squeeze it all in. Like it's not like it's like a time audit. Somebody came in and was like, oh, you have to, there's time. I just don't want it to feel so pressure cookery like it used to.
mhm,
So what I noticed is like, oh, that's the trick is like where do I make that time in a way that also still feels like the way I want it to feel? And that is like it's kind of like a curious question that I'm confident I'm going to figure it out because I think I used to have the idea like, okay, if I want to get back in shape on my bike, I just need to go ride my bike for about 6 weeks and it's going to be fine. And
yeah,
that was before when I was consistently riding for years, always. If I took a little bit of time off, well, it just took a little bit of time to get back. Now I'm like, okay, maybe within a year or two, I might be able to do that race I want to do instead of being like, just got to work out for 6 weeks. I'm
yeah,
like, okay, in the
uh-huh,
course of a year or two, I think this little puzzle is going to be figured out. I'm confident. I just haven't figured it out yet. Like, I don't know. And I sometimes
mhm,
I'm troubled by that. Like, I will, just being transparent. I'm like, God, I really want to figure this out, but I can't quite see how. And, but I'd say about 75% of the time, I'm like, this is going to fall into place. I will figure this out. I will do something. And for me, at least, biking like takes a bit of time. It's not the same as running. Like running, I can do something very short and sweet, strength workouts. I can do 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Biking is usually, even if I ride from the house, like a 30-minute ride isn't the same as like a 30-minute run. Like it's
mhm,
just like so usually there's a time component there, or like getting to the trails that I want to be on. Like if I ride from my house, I don't drive in the car. There's a certain amount of like it not requiring, but like kind of like want to do more than just like 10 minutes on a trail. And trails are kind
mhm,
of long and they're big. And
mhm.
so for that part, I don't know, not sure.
Yeah, I
I
went
love
through
that you
this.
asked this though.
Yeah, I had contemplated. So when I started residency, I had a hard time giving up the identity. I used to race marathons and I used to be fast for myself, not like Olympic fast, but I used to run a lot faster than I can run right now.
Yeah.
And for years, I would judge myself on that. And then, like you, I'm like, oh, yeah, I didn't want to hustle. I don't want to be doing this speed work. I want to be compassionate. And I hear sustainability too. It's like, I don't I don't want to be getting up at those crazy hours. I used to do 2 days like all the time, but I also had a very compulsive relationship with running, and that's an addiction to me. And I know it's a very slippery slope. And and having self-compassion with the exercise and being like, well, what is self-compassion? It's to bike whenever you feel like biking. And if that race, like when I stopped signing up for marathons, and it was hard for a few years because it was part of my
Oh
identity.
yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
was like, wait, I don't actually want to go run a marathon outside. Like I'll go run it on a treadmill, but I don't want to get up early to do it. I want to be able to go to the bathroom when I want. I don't want to pay for it. I want to control the weather, so I'm going to run down the treadmill, right? So like I'm just over being an extremist when it comes to I'll run everywhere. I'm like, no, but I won't. I'll only run inside on the treadmill because
Oh,
it's climate controlled.
I love, I mean, this echoes what you're saying earlier about like having, sort of saying, I want these values that are values that we hear that are the right things to value. Like, I'm going to run anywhere and, like doing marathons outside in any conditions, doing it this way is like the right thing or the cool thing or the hardcore thing to do versus like, what do I really want? Like, if there's no rules, like what would I pick? Oh, I would pick climate control. I would pick the treadmill. Like I would pick, it's so fun to think about it that way, and I've definitely had to do a lot of that work too with my identity as an athlete and like going out on rides. Like one of the things that used to happen a lot to me is I would go out on a bike ride, be on a slight incline, and I would have like a chorus, like a committee in my head that was like, oh, these people are like who are driving by, they're judging how slow you're going. They're like rolling their eyes at you. Like, isn't it, I would hope that nobody would come by. I would hope that nobody would pass me. And if anybody passed me, I would hope that they were like on an e-bike or, gosh forbid if it was somebody who was like 90 years old and just was like, hi, honey, going past me like I was standing still. I would, I would feel horrendously self-conscious and awful because I was judging my current speed based on where I thought I should have been based on my past instead of just being like, it's really fun to be on my bike and it feels so great to move my body in this way. And off, like that took a while to get to.
Yeah. So people get caught up in this all the time when it goes to going to a gym. They're afraid people are going to judge them. So, okay. So no one actually pays attention to you at the gym. They don't care unless like they're attracted to you or they have this internal judgment that's a reflection of what they judge people on and they're judging people. But usually no one's paying attention to anybody. And of course, if people are being bullied at the gym, that's one thing. And screw those people that make stupid comments. But what I've always found is that usually my dad, I come from like not a bodybuilding, a powerlifting family. You can tell
Oh
with
yeah.
huge arms that I have. I used to throw shot put. I used to be explosive.
Did you really? Oh, I
Was
love
like
it.
very into it. And I was like the base for cheerleading, like super into being ripped and like but then I became a long distance runner and my arms deflated a little bit. But when he would train in the basement and he said, don't talk to me when I'm lifting. He would get mad because he said it's dangerous if they're trying to
Mhm.
concentrate. And so I'm like, yeah, I don't talk to people when they're lifting. People are talking to me on the treadmill. I get kind of annoyed. I'm like, this is my time to just not think about things. Or like if people come in, I have a treadmill at the gym in my community, in my apartments, and people will come in and blast their own music or sermons or something, or like be talking on the phone and like, how dare you interrupt the silence that like my carved out silent time.
Oh my goodness. I will say I am very grateful. Like as an introvert, as somebody who like I sometimes I just need to sort of like create that bubble around me. I'm so grateful for the fact that you can see things like this
Yeah.
and like in my, sound canceling headphones because
Uh-huh.
I feel like even if they're not on their sound canceling mode, I'm not listening to anything. For me, it's a nice social cue that I need my space. And if somebody does want to talk to me, then I feel a little bit like it almost gives me a sense of the confidence to be like, oh, I'm busy right now. If I don't have it in me to say something like, I just need my space, please don't talk to me.
Mhm.
Which that isn't really like, I mean, if you know me and you see me out in the world, probably would think, oh, so extroverted and chit chatty and stuff like, oh, but sometimes like I want that space or silence, which is one of the beautiful things about mountain biking is that you could
Mhm.
be out in the woods, right? Or even on a trail getting to the woods, like it can be very nice for solitude and silence. But I love that you're on a treadmill. You don't need to go out in the woods for that.
I know my parents live in a really safe area. It's got an A+ safety rating compared to Houston, which is a D or an F, depending on which scale you look at. And so when I'm at their place, I was running outside in the nature and I was like, man, I really wish I'd lived somewhere where I could actually do this. And then I went to North Carolina, and that's where I used to live when I was in residency. And it always felt like home to me. And so those two places I ran outside, and it was like super calm and you get to be with the trees. And North Carolina, you talked about hills. Oh my God. Okay, same thing actually happened to me when I was in North Carolina. I was running the hills. I don't run hills. I run on the treadmill. I do not do inclines. I am not trying to impress anybody. So I was running these hills, and when I would come back, there was like no way in hell I was running. I was just dead by the time I got back. So I would walk up it, and I would
Yeah.
think, I hope no one I know sees me, because when I lived there, I was diehard, like running. I ran for the Air Force marathon team, but I ran the half marathon, but I was obsessed with like just going all out all the time. But it
Yeah.
did trickle into my head. And then I'm like, why do I actually care? And I'm a lot healthier than I was back when I lived in that area. And I was like, oh, they're going to judge my body because I look healthy. And I'm like, wait, the people who love you are going to be happy that you don't look like you're going to die. I'm like, but all those things come up in our head, and we're like, oh man, if it wasn't for coaching, I would have, I wouldn't, I actually think I would have canceled my trip because I was so concerned that I don't look like I'm going to die. And I was so concerned about, oh, I don't know, I didn't rent a car. Like, will I be able to get to the gym, which I didn't ever go. I went outside, and like all those thought patterns that I had to break while I was there, it was like so freeing because none of it's like real.
No, I think it's so, I mean, one of the things I'm so grateful for is that, like, for both of us, that we now have this like arsenal of tools and things that are so helpful. But like before I learned these things, if I would have been in your shoes and I had gone, back, I had had one identity in North Carolina, I'd left, totally different identity coming back. It could be like really unnerving. Like the whole trip could have been horrendous because of believing all the like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to see me and they're going to think I look different and da da da. And like, I mean, that's enough to have somebody be like, and I'm going home early. It was terrible. All because of
Mhm.
the, deeply ingrained narratives that if we don't know how to look at them with compassion or like unblend from them, as I would say, using internal family system speak, to unblend from whatever's there so you can get a little space and get some perspective. If you don't know how to do that, which I don't know, besides in the world of coaching and therapy, like it's
Yeah.
not taught, it would make sense somebody would have a horrendous time, right?
Yeah. And I was going back to the residency that I left. So I had all the reasons to be like, what am I doing? But I needed to process. I needed to see these people again. I needed to do it because I've been stuck.
Uh,
And
yeah,
it turned out to be the best trip I've ever decided to do. And the way that we prepare ourselves, for the week before it, I had 3 therapy appointments, and that week before, and you like, how can I set my future self up for success? And then I had a
yeah,
follow-up appointment when I came back, because I was like, I don't know if I'll need it, but I felt safe and I felt supported so that I could be vulnerable and I could lean into it. Whereas like, if you're not figuring out, well, what do I need and how can I create that sense of safety or have your own back, then you go in and you can be closed or like not have a way to process. So I was like, wow,
yeah.
that's one of the like the most self-compassionate things I've done in
Uh,
probably my life.
it's so beautiful that you prepared yourself so well and that you did. I mean, I love that you're just like, you and I both believe in therapy and coaching and like anything you can do to support yourself so much. But I think in telling those stories, you do what I think is so essential is to normalize self-support. Like I'm gonna, whether it's friend, whether it's therapist, whether it's counselor, whether it's mentor, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. As long as you get it when you need it, or even before you need it, which I'm a big fan. I think you should like come out of the womb and you should be assigned a team of supporters
Hmm.
to go with you, and you change them out every so often until you find the right fit. But everybody has them like all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about coaching, because people, I feel there's kind of this polarizing topic sometimes, especially when
Mhm.
people are trying to navigate the systems that need to change. And I'm a I'm a huge, I got into coaching in terms of being like a client when I was desperate. We actually
Mm,
met, we were both in a
yeah,
phase of transition and like chaos. I think when I don't
yeah.
remember messaging you until we read it a year later. And I was like, oh my God, I was totally out of my mind. But
Oh,
I didn't appreciate, like I had been in therapy a lot, and I actually, for me, I focused all on my deficits in therapy. And that's not against any
Oh,
therapist.
right.
I was
Yeah.
just like, I'm depressed, I have this and that, and I'm clearly broken. And I needed to do something different. So then when coaching was introduced, it's like it puts you in the driver's seat and then you figure out like what are your strengths and your obstacles and your way forward. But I'm curious to
Yeah.
hear more about your journey with coaching, and if people aren't really sure about coaching or they're saying, well, why are we changing ourselves when it's a system problem? What do you say to these individuals?
Oh, oh, good. So I do want to put a little pin to say to come back to. I would love to hear, as somebody who did therapy, extensively and still probably does, hopefully, like, like I think we should all do everything we need.
Yeah.
I would love to hear your take on the differences between therapy and coaching, especially as somebody who is a coach, right?
Hmm.
So my experience with coaching was, I mean, I was on call one night and I reluctantly listened to a podcast that was about coaching. I'd never listened to a podcast before, and I was like, what's this podcast app thing? And listened to the podcast about coaching. And the topic matter of the podcast was nothing I was interested in, but the concepts, I was just hooked. It was like being back in college again, learning about all the things in, cognitive psychology and social psychology. I was, whoa, these concepts are amazing. And I was so enamored with the concepts that I wanted to go into coach training, not to become a coach, but because, like, you gotta like learn all the things. Speaking of doing all the trainings, right? I told my husband, like, this stuff is so fascinating. I must learn about this. Like, I don't know, like maybe when I retire in 25, 30 years, maybe this will be like something I do for fun, but I just want to know about this stuff. I don't
Hmm.
really want to be a coach. I just want to learn about it. So I guess the best way to learn about it is to go learn how they train coaches.
Yeah.
So I did that. And part of the training was, well, you need to get a coach and be coached. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll do that. So I did it as part of a training, and it was kind of interesting to learn it from I'm going to learn, like, almost like I'm going to learn how to be a doctor before I learn how to be a patient. And so my approach was different. I didn't get a coach and go, oh, this is amazing, I want to be one. And so for me, it took a while, like, to find a fit and to find somebody that worked and to experience it from a client as I was learning. So,
Yeah.
but once I learned about it and found coaches that like taught me the things and helped me in ways that were so powerful, I had a very similar experience to you, where I felt like it gave me a tool set
Hmm.
that helped me not only understand myself, but helped me like understand why I thought what I thought, like why some of the socially conditioned beliefs like were there and made sense, why I did what I did, and how, if I wanted to make changes, here were like 10 different tools that I could try out and see what they would work. And it was very forward facing. Like, I loved that about it. Like, the learner
Hmm.
in me was like, ooh, this is the way you could look at it. This is the way you could look at it. And this is another way you could look at it. And that was just amazing because for me, I think coaching is, it's like, it's a synthesis of all these different fields, like ancient wisdom
Hmm.
mixed with neuroscience, mixed with, cognitive, aspects of psychology as well as somatic aspects. It's all put together and there's so many different flavors of it, but it's always extremely pragmatic. And it's the conversation that you have with somebody else that that asks you questions you wouldn't think to ask yourself, and helps you think about things in a different way, but also doesn't just have you musing about like existential, abstract, broad things, has you go, oh, let me muse, let me reflect, and let me discover. And also, let's keep this really real and really tangible and really practical so that in my everyday lived life, I can do something with some of the discovery that I get on the exploration.
Hmm.
So, so in terms of why, and then to answer your second point about like, so how does coaching or any intervention, where's its place when we have a dysfunctional system? I thought it's okay. We live in a world with like, we're, this is, November of 2023. So anybody listening to this knows that like there's a shit show going on with, cataclysmic things, socially, politically, environmentally, in the medical system, in, almost every caretaking field there is. I mean, it's abysmal, right? And my thought is the system is broken in so many different systems, right? No matter where you look, you're gonna find a bunch of broken systems. In the
Hmm.
world of physicians and the world of caretakers for clinical clinicians, it's broken and there's dysfunction and it does need to change. But if it needs to change, I want I want everybody to be at their best and not be in their own way so that they can think as creatively as possible and help make the change.
Hmm.
And if we're in a system that is, really awful and, takes advantage of people pleasing, perfectionistic high achievers at their own expense, and they're walking around like hollow shells of humans, they're not going to have anything to offer to change things.
Hmm.
But if you can do coaching and understand your agency better, you're going to be better equipped to make some of the changes so that hopefully like our planet will exist in more than like 20 or 40 or 80 or 100 years, and
Yeah.
hopefully things will be better, right? So so that's my thought, is that like I'd just like to accept that there are things that are messed up structurally, culturally, with a lot of things. And if we don't know our own agency, we're going to get in our own way and we're not going to be able to fix it.
I love that agency, because I think when you're feeling, if you're in a system which is toxic, like the whole healthcare system and in this world, uh, there's this sense of learned helplessness where you just become complacent.
Mhm.
And I had gotten there a lot. And that's what I
Yeah.
think it was. It literally felt like getting back into the driver's seat. But there was a quote by Danielle Laporte. I went 5.5 months without pay in
Mm.
2021, and I was not well. I was at my lowest mentally and physically not well. And I was like, can't they see me? Right? Like, I need money, right? Like, oh my God. And I was working for two places, two institutions, which clearly had enough money to pay me. I'm like, what is it about me that says you could walk all over me and not pay me and that will be fine? Why am I
Mm.
accepting this? Right? And I felt so unseen and undervalued, but I kept working because work was my worth. And that's where I found meaning at the
Mm.
time. But then I advocated, once I started my job, I advocated for pay and to be seen, or at least validated. That was a really hard time. And I was told to get over my past trauma. And so that's how people gaslight you, right? Like, no, actually, I was completely appropriate in like trying to address this issue. But what came to be was like when I left surgery in 2017, I thought I was worthless. I thought I was broken. I thought that I had just failed at life, rather than see that I left a residency that wasn't for me, and I should celebrate that I made that difficult decision to move forward and move on and accept that I devoted a lot of time and energy to that and it wasn't the right fit. And I was full of guilt and shame. I had the
Mm.
narrative that I was worthless. And therefore, it showed up as accepting jobs for no pay and then underpay. And what happens when we learn this about ourselves and we develop self compassion, it's like putting glasses on. And you can see, like, I don't treat myself like that anymore and no longer going to tolerate that from others. And that's the image I see when you're sharing, like, you get your agency back, because otherwise, we will never be part of the change in the system. And you see, you've taken your autonomy, like you create your life, whatever it looks like. And there's people that create things inside and outside of medicine that are healing in ways that our system was never going to allow. Like, you're more of a healer in doing what you're doing, and what that looks like is a lot different than our structured traditional healthcare system.
Oh, you said that all so beautifully. Like I couldn't agree more. And I think it just brings the question of like for anybody listening, if they feel that they are stuck or they look around and they're like, oh my gosh, I am undervalued. Why is this? Number one, like you and I are not gaslighting anybody and saying, oh, it's because of you. It's because of your thoughts and your beliefs. It's like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
There are things that like people are taken advantage of. Like, it's a very easy thing to do. You see that with like the staffing shortages, and they're just like,
Yeah.
oh, we have a staffing shortage, but you made it work last week, so I think we'll just keep on going.
Yep.
But I think it's great just to be like, okay, it's actually safe to ask the question, what's going on here? And since there is a better way, like even though the system may seem like there's no other, like you look around your job and you're like, I can't see, oh, like nobody else gets paid anymore. We're all in the same boat. We're at all. So even just asking this question, it's like, okay, how could this be different? What is acceptable to me? Like what is not tolerable that I am tolerating simply because of familiarity
Mm-hmm.
and feeling stuck because maybe, I mean, because let's just be honest, like change is scary. Putting a residency program, changing your job, moving across the country, selling your house, like those are things that require courage. And it's sometimes easier to stay in something miserable than it is to take that leap. But I think it's also important just to ask the question of like, okay, what is going on here? And what, like, if I could change something, what would I want and why? So that you can work towards being able to put those glasses on and be like, whoa, I do see, like, either I see things I don't want, or I see, oh, I don't want this, but I see how I can make this better in a way that like fills up my cup and doesn't leave me feeling so depleted.
Yeah, there was a physician's podcast that said, you don't get what you want, you get what you tolerate.
Mhm.
And
Good one.
I was like, oh, this is so true. But you're right. It's not gaslighting in terms of the fact of validating that staff shorting, like there's crap that's happening and a lot of it feels outside of your control. And sometimes the circumstances are such that you can't immediately depart. And it might be the best at the time. And then you understand, well, I'm staying here because I value this. And it's whatever aspects of it that's benefiting what you do value at the time might be true, right? There's people that stay in the system that might not be the ideal long-term situation, but because it's necessary at the time, I think we're working on ourselves individually helps is like, how can I minimize the suck? Right? Like how can I make this suck less, be more sustainable while I'm navigating my next moves? Like I've been there multiple
Exactly.
times.
Yes,
And because otherwise we can ruminate and make it actually worse on ourselves.
totally. Yeah, I totally agree.
You were asking about the difference between coaching and therapy. But
Yeah.
you highlighted a lot of the similarities in that there's a lot of components in coaching that can be brought into it that share some philosophies as therapy. But when it comes to a crisis, suicidality, not for coaching. You know, we can do suicide prevention in the fact that we're reducing people's distress. But if it come and they are feeling suicidal, it's important for a mental health professional to be there for that individual. We're not going to deep dive into your past or very traumatic incidences. But I will say that in coaching, a lot can come up because you do start to uncover some of the root beliefs. And that's where I say, you know, you said everyone should be born with a support group. And I think that anytime someone starts coaching, it's really important to understand a lot might come up and that it's probably a good idea to do coaching and therapy concurrently. I know that happened for me when I started, especially the somatic type. In our training, we did very limited, but get into your body. And as someone who's had a lot go on, it's not easy to get into my body and to sit there. And I was like, I got to quit this program. It was Byron Katie, the work and getting into your body. I'm like, oh my God. And then I just sat like I am now, like with my hand on my heart. And I'm like, or how can I, like, what support do I need in order to be able, like, what's coming up? What support do I need in order to process this? And that's all right. I go to the VA. And I'm like, I'm going to go to the VA mental health and have a little bit of treatment there. But I find that otherwise there's quite a bit of overlaps. How would you differentiate between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a very simplistic kind of superficial way, like when people like maybe haven't heard of either, like I don't, never been to a therapist, never been to a coach. What's the difference? I think a simple way to think about it is oftentimes therapy can help us when we're having difficulty getting through the day, the week, the month, because we are struggling with things and we want to get back up to a like
Mm-hmm.
like a medium baseline where we can exist and get through the day. And then coaching can take you in, you're existing just fine. Like there can be some struggles, but you're doing okay. And you want to optimize, you want to empower, you want to learn tools, you want to like sort of like you've got your running base down and you
Mm-hmm.
want to get to where you can run a little faster. That's a dumb
Yeah.
analogy, but you know what I'm saying? Like sort of like
Yes.
therapy can get you to where you're functional and okay, and then coaching can go there. And the reality though, I think is very much what you just said. Like I picture those, the Venn diagram where there's coaching and therapy, these circles. And depending on your school of therapy and your modality or your methodology of coaching, there can be a significant overlap, particularly if you're a trauma informed coach who does somatic work, like some of that overlap with some of the therapeutic things, they're nearly identical. So
Mm-hmm.
they're, and at the same time, there are places where there are clear departures, like you
Yeah.
said, like with suicidality, with certain things, coaching is for the most part, going to be completely inappropriate for certain things, right? It's just not a match, right? It's like going to put on, I don't know, ice skates when you want to go for a run. Not what you need,
I like that analogy.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating too, because I feel like as humans, there's days we function, days we don't. Like, it's like, so we're just like, okay, who am I going to call today? But it's like in
Totally.
a perfect world, I agree with you. It's a lot of it's the functional status, and if somebody is not getting out of their bed because they're severely depressed, it's not a time for coaching, and it's not a time to shackle up and try to power through it. It's a time to really understand what's going on. But yeah, it is fascinating too, because if we think about in like a week, as we say, oh yeah, I had this full spectrum of highs and this full spectrum of lows at the same time, because oh, guess what? I'm human, and we get it both.
Totally. Yeah. And, as you're talking, the thing I was just saying or thinking about is like, I do think there's a place for like specific methodologies, like whether it's from a coach or a therapist, where because my therapist that I see, I'm I'm functional, things are going well, but she has a particular methodology that she uses that there's exploration I want to do, and she knows that skill set. She happens to
Mhm.
be a therapist, right? But there's a specific thing that I like to do that I want to explore. Is I mean, that does bring up lots of stuff, but it's not because she's a therapist, it's because of what the type of therapy she does, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So it's not,
Yep.
so I think that sort of simplistic of like therapy gets you up to functional and coaching takes you to better is like a superficial dichotomy, but
Yeah.
it does, like, I think it's an easy way to differentiate, even though there is so much overlap. And you can be totally well, like feeling great and amazing and be like, I think I want a therapist on my support team. Like, not, you don't go to a therapist just because like something is wrong, right? And you
Mhm.
don't not go to a coach because something is wrong. It's like, no, you can do both, and vice versa.
And you said it took you a while to find a coach that you resonated with, and I find that to be true with
Oh,
the
100%.
therapist. So I went back to this therapist that I used to see when I was in residency, and he was amazing. And then he left the institution for private practice, smart man, and I never found anyone that I hit it off with as well. And I just
Yeah.
stopped going, because it's like I go for eating disorder care. It's a very specialized, like people often
Yes.
don't want to touch, like they have so many misconceptions about anorexia, and I don't want
Mm,
to rehash it all. I don't want to know more about my condition than the person that I'm like, no, anorexia is a very manipulative condition in your own head. For me to then tell you how to help me is not helpful, right? Because I'm like, I'm trying to shut up this liar in my brain. But this guy he's like, I was with him when I developed my suicidal ideation. He had a way of making me laugh through the darkest moments, which you don't have to make people laugh, but he was very serious. But then he would say things like, you know, if we had like the most famous oral surgeon, I wouldn't know who that is. Like I was holding oral surgery on this huge pedestal that I had to become this person, right? In order to be worthy. And then I was like, he's so right, right? That comment is so true that I don't even know who the most well-known oral surgeons are. Like I don't know walking down the hall what other people do, and I don't think any more or less of them for what they do or don't do. And then he's offered me that when he was in school, he got great grades, and his friend said, "Why are you going to be a psychologist? Why don't you go into med school?" And he goes, "Because I don't want to go to med school. I want to be a psychologist." And those two things that he said to me replay all the time in my head, because I'm like, he chose what he wanted to do. He's intentional about it. He's really good at it. And he reminds me that my worth was never going to be more or less if I was a surgeon or not. I was just going to be a lot more tired. And right. I'm
Oh,
like,
I
but
love it. Oh, I
yeah,
love this guy. Like, I'm like, oh, now I need to meet him. He
he's
sounds
so good.
fantastic.
So he's
And I'm
so
taking those two little gems. Those are fantastic. I love
there's
when we
he's
can
so
hear those
good.
little things, right?
Yeah. And I when I was going to North Carolina, I messaged him because I'm like, I'm going to be in your state. I know the licensure things, right? I'm like, can I please see you? Because this is going to be hard. And he messaged me back that he had a reciprocal license in Texas, where I currently live. And I'm like,
No.
thank God. And then I looked at my journals. I've seen him at every transitional point in my life, like in the past when I was leaving oral surgery. And then again, after I finished my second residency, I went back to see him. And now I'm finishing my fellowship. I'm like, this is so funny. It's like how much these people mean to us. And I don't have to rehash my story because he was there.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it's like,
that's phenomenal.
yeah. And the same with the coaches, right? It's like you develop, it's so important to develop a relationship with the person if they're not your person. Therapy, coaching, if you don't feel safe telling your doctor things, well, find a doctor that you do.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I love that you found a person that like felt like home in terms of where you could explore things. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I don't get codependent because I know he can leave again, like, okay, but I'm just going to be grateful for every session because it's one more session that I didn't know I was going to be able to have.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great way to look at it. I love it.
Yeah. So we've talked about so many great things. What would you like the audience to take away from our discussion today?
Oh my gosh. Those questions, like I love them and hate them at the same time. I
I
like,
hate them, so I am awkward.
gosh, I love it. Thanks a lot, Jillian. What I wanted to take away. I will throw this out there. Like one of the things as I'm killing time for my brain to think about this, one of the things that like in coaching and in some coaching programs that I both love and hate is some of the questions with a client be like, and so what's your takeaway? I find that like in a session where I'm like processing things, I don't know my takeaway in that, like, and
Yes,
but
I hate that question too.
right.
I don't ask clients that because I hate it. Now
Yeah.
I asked you it on
Oh no,
video.
no. Oh, but this
No.
is different though. But and yet I've seen it done. The crazy thing is like so I don't ask it. I mean, I've had times in my career where I have asked it for a specific reason, and I've seen it done artfully, like in oftentimes group settings, not for the purpose of asking one person what's your takeaway, but for people to hear what other people heard, so they could think about things in a different way, and that is beautiful. But there are certain individual times where I bristle, where I'm like that poor client has no clue what the takeaway is because they are in the middle of processing. They don't know but I think it's kind of almost like a product of our societal way of like wanting to have a very discrete beginning, a solution, and an end with a bow, because that's like a good way to fix things, right? And as a fixer, I appreciate that. So it's interesting that like in that setting, I'm like, I don't do that. But in terms of takeaways for this, things that like, because I think this is a different thing, right? I
Yeah.
think takeaways here are if you feel trapped, it's time to get curious about what's going on. I think that, like, from what you said, I'm like, okay, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I, of course, like, will have to say, I think it's the takeaway to like, if you think you have deeply entrenched habits of thought, habits of emotional responses that might be out of, bigger than seem appropriate to the situation, but you don't know how to control them, lots of triggering things, or habits you just can't break, they're all more moldable and changeable than you actually think. And I remember thinking like that was just revolutionary to be like, you mean I can unlearn things? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I don't know. I think that's about it. I think there are so many good ones that, like, compiling them to a list, my brain is just like, I don't know. I'm just enjoying how many good ones there were.
Yeah, I love that. Get curious.
Yeah.
Get
I
curious.
think it's our superpower, right? And I think it's really hard to find a human that can't tap into curiosity. Like I mean, everybody in healthcare, very curious, love to learn, wonder why this works, how this is connected. I don't think that's just our field. I think most people, once they start getting a little curious, and they can do it in other areas when you can apply it to yourself. I mean, I just think it's the antidote to so many things, the antidote to self-judgment, to
Mm-hmm.
self-criticism, to perfectionism, to stuckness, just to get curious.
I love it. There's a book called The Humble Inquiry. It's really small, but it pretty much is on that question asking about it's coming from a place of curiosity. So it can
Yeah.
really help with communication in your own head and also with other people. Like if people say things, isn't that interesting? I'm curious, right? It's
Yes.
like immediate diffusion of any sort of conflictual, like angry. I'm so mad that that person thinks that I'm curious why that person thinks that.
Yeah. I think that can be also, I'm thinking about there's a book, it's called, I don't know if you read the book called Unbound, and they talk about a communication. fantastic. A communication technique, if you ever feel put on the spot, is to, if the spotlight feels like it's on you and you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they asked me that, or they must hate me, that's why they asked me that, or it's just to ask a question to the other person,
Mhm.
any question, so that you can turn that spotlight away from yourself if you feel sort of pressured in a public way. And if you can use curiosity as opposed to just like, I'm going to ask any question, I find that makes it easier. Like, oh,
Mm,
it's so curious. Why did you ask? Right? Like,
I
it's just a
love
great way,
it.
even if you need to buy time, just like, I don't know what to say. Like, oh, where did that come from? Oh, or like, or how about the weather? Like, even it doesn't matter what the question is. Like, just asking a
Mm,
question. I think when you can be curious, sometimes in complex communication scenarios, it can help you in so many ways.
I love it. And where can they
Yeah.
find you?
So everything is Habits on Purpose. Habitsonpurpose.com, Habits on Purpose, the podcast, Habits on Purpose, the Facebook group. And then Kristi Angevine and wherever else places I exist. I guess Instagram. I sort of go there sometimes.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put all those in the show notes. So make sure to check out this lovely human. We've got the podcast, you've got your coaching, you do amazing speaking opportunities. So I
Yeah.
highly recommend they reach out to you. And thank you for being here.
Thanks for having like time to hang out. This is so fun. I love it. Thank
Yeah. And
you.
I'm going to go hop on my flight to Oregon now. So I'll see you soon.
Yes, just tell me. Seriously, I'll pick you up. Tell me when.
I can't wait.